and we're going to get started right on time. I'm very excited because I know my Indian history is very weak. And if anybody was to ask me, we were just discussing, I think I could probably name maybe two or three queens in Indian history. So today, very, very nice that we're discussing actually the invisible queens in Indian history with two amazing authors. We've got with us Dr. Devika Rangachari and Deepa Agarwal as we discuss Queen of the Earth and other invisible queens in Indian history. A little bit about Sipping Thoughts. I am Sukirti Gupta. I'm one of the co-founders of Sipping Thoughts. Sipping Thoughts was a multimedia platform company that was co-founded by me and by Meeta Gudgutia. It was set up keeping in mind the tagline, Real Women, Real Thoughts. We wanted to create a no judgment platform and create a network of women for women. Sipping Thoughts reaches to about 2.5 million women on a monthly basis. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. Check out our website, we're on LinkedIn. A lot of very, very interesting content for you to see. Today, though, we are discussing a very interesting topic with novelist Devika Rangachari on her new book, Queen of the Earth. It is the story of the 9th century queen of Orissa, Prithvi Mahadevi. It is a strong feminist tale of a woman determined to fight all odds and to leave her mark in the world. So today we will be discussing her and some other invisible queens. So I've just finished reading the book. I just finished it. It was actually a very quick read. Just give me a second. Sorry, I've got something in my eye. It was a very, very quick read, very, very fast. I actually, once I started it, I couldn't put it down. So I finished it in one sitting, one go, and I was impressed and impressed more because I think two things: the story, because the story is a tale that intrigues us, and a question. I think, especially in the end, why are the women wiped out of Indian history? And was this done with some intent, or have we just kind of focused more on the men that have been really in Indian history? So it's also a tale of women empowerment. Novelist Devika Rangachari's Queen of the Earth tells the story of Prithvi Mahadevi, and it's a strong feminist tale of a woman who's determined to fight all odds. Dr. Devika is an award winning writer whose book, Queen of Ice, was on the White Raven list and won the Neve Book Award for young adults. And it has also been optioned to be made into a movie and a television series. So, of course, when we see something like that, we always beg the question, who would she like to play Queen of the Earth? Who would she like to play Queen of Ice? She has written many, many books. Her books include The 10 Indian Monarchs, whose amazing stories you may not know, Tales of Love and Adventure, Swami Vivekananda, The Man with Vision, The Merry Mischief of Gopal Band, The Wit of Tenali Raman, and Growing Up. So many, many books. I mean, if you go to the Goodreads, you will see a whole list of her books will come up. She's also the recipient of the prestigious National Fellowship awarded by the Ministry of Culture to research aspects of gender and historical fiction in Indian children's literature. Devika recently also completed her postdoctoral research on gender in Indian history. So welcome, Devika, to Sipping Thoughts. We are excited to have you here.
Sukirti.
And Devika today will be in conversation with another incredibly well-known author, a poet and a translator, Deepa Agarwal, who grew up in the pristine Kumani region set in the foothills of the Himalayas. She writes for both children and adult and has over 50 books published to her credit, including The Puffin Classes, Chandrakanta and Listen, O King, 5 and 20 Tales of Vikram and Vetal, a frequent contributor to magazines and journals in India and abroad. She has edited, compiled, and contributed to several anthologies. Among other awards, she received the NSERT National Award for Children's Literature in 1993 for her picture book, Ashok's New Friends, while her historical fiction, Caravan to Tibet, was on the 2008 IBBY International Board of Books for Young People Honor List. Her works have been translated into several Indian and foreign languages. So, Deepa, again, welcome to Sipping Thoughts. We're very excited to have you here.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Sukriti.
And before we get into the discussion of the queens, I would like to ask both of you, because both of you are such gifted writers, such talented authors. What defines both of you as a writer and as an author?
Do you want to go first, Deepa?
Of course. Go, please go ahead.
Oh, okay. What defines me as a writer is just a general passion for books, reading, and creating good content, and hopefully honesty in what I write, and readability too. So I think I hope that that's what defines me as a writer.
Deepa, what about you?
Well, as for me, I think it's just a love for stories, a love for words, for language, and, exploring ideas and trying to communicate. And that is the main reason why I write, because I want to communicate my opinions, my reflections on what is happening on the world around me. So I think that's what defines me as a writer, because I write in many different genres. I haven't confined myself to one particular genre. So I ramble all over the place wherever my story strikes me as developing. So that's what I think is my definition as a writer.
Now, of course, I beg to ask this question because a lot of us, of course, have this romantic notion in our minds. We would love to be writers. But what drew you to this profession and how difficult is it to make it a career? Now, Deepa, you've got over 50 books, and I know, Devika, you've got numerous books to your name. So, how difficult is it to make this as a career for yourself? And after this, I will hand it to you so that we start talking about the queen of the earth.
Well, it's not easy, as Devika also knows, that making it as a writer, it's a struggle. But it all begins with reading, and I was an avid reader from my childhood, so I guess it was very natural that one day I thought, let me write my own stories. So what needs is motivation, self-belief, because you receive a lot of rejection along the way. So that's what I tell young people, that don't get discouraged. Just have belief in yourself. If one editor despises your manuscript, there will be another person who would be very passionate about it. So this is what it means, just perseverance and reading a lot. I think that's what's very important in taking up writing as a profession.
Deepa, how about you? Devika, now?
If we had to discuss whether it's possible to make a living, particularly as a children's writer, I think Deepa and I could rant on and on for hours on end. So I think we should just, just confine it to very a sort of diplomatic answer and say, well, yeah, of course it is possible. And particularly if you're very passionate about, what you do, then anything is possible. But it's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of it's taking small joys along the way, because you're not going to get a huge immediate massive reward in monetary or other terms, but it's just that something you love, something you believe in, and there's nothing more thrilling than having a reader come up to you and say that they what you wrote completely resonated with their experiences or their thoughts. So that's really rewarding.
Well, thank you. Thank you both for that. Now I turn it over to you, Deepa, because I know that we are ready to get this conversation started, especially about Queen of the Earth and the other invisible queens in Indian history.
Thanks so much, Sukirti. Well, first of all, good morning to all our dear viewers, and I'm so happy to see you here. And big congratulations to Devika for writing this wonderful book. And as you said, Sukirti, it's such a gripping read that you can't put it down. And for me, it was a process of discovery, because I never knew about the existence of this queen, Prithvimahadevi of Odisha. And so, see, when we're talking about invisible queens, it brings us back to that old topic that history is so often his story rather than her story, And talking about a personal experience while researching a book on Noor Jahan of all people, one of the best known figures, the empress, of the Mughal Empire, I was astonished in the course of my research to find that she hardly finds mention in the Jahangir Nama, which is the official record of her husband's rule, when she was actually the par. So that just shows that how women tend to be wiped out of history. And in the case of Noor Jahan, it's the accounts by foreign travelers that give us, all the information about her. So this is something very important to think about. And I definitely would like to congratulate Devika for bringing these, uh, unearthing these queens from the dust of history, literally, and giving them shape. Uh, First, of course, Rani Didda, what a fascinating personality, my goodness, what a strong woman. And we know so little about her, fortunately. And it's wonderful. Congratulations that it's going to be made into a movie. Then a lot of people will discover her. And well, talking about all this, the gender bias in history, Devika, do tell us why you decided to bring these queens, tell their story, so that, children, especially because children are the ones who remember when they read, what they read in their childhood the way we do. So do tell us why you chose these women and why you brought them into the limelight.
Thank you so much, Deepa. It's wonderful to be in a conversation with such a renowned writer as you, and a very good friend, of course. And thank you, Sukirti, for organizing this along with Penguin. And thank you, whoever's attending, because, this is a topic that I feel very strongly about, and it's wonderful to know that, you're spending time on a Saturday morning to actually sit through this. Why did I decide to write about these queens? Well, I am a gender historian, and in the course of my doctoral and postdoctoral research, um, which is in early medieval North India, that's roughly the 7th to the 12th century AD, I discovered that the original sources, such as inscriptions, texts, coins, and so on, were telling me a particular story, but all the writings and the narratives on the history of North India were telling me something completely different. Now, early medieval North India is a very, very significant period in every sense of the term, in political terms, social terms, economic terms, religious terms. But whenever you read anything about this period, women are treated as this sort of, amorphous lump that sits on the periphery of the real events. And it's the men who are actually powering the action, doing the real things that matter, whereas the women sit around, and their status sort of reflects larger changes around them. So it's as if they have no voice in anything, no part to play in the action, and that their role doesn't impinge on any aspect of that period. Now, but when I actually started studying the original sources, I realized that they were actually telling me that women had a very, very powerful presence in this period. And this is not just true of royal women, this is true of non-royal women as well, the ordinary women. And there was this enormous body of evidence that I uncovered, just these remarkable queens and non-royal women, and that just did not find a mention in almost any narrative of the period, historical or otherwise. And the problem was compounded when I used to do sessions in schools, in the time when we could go to schools to do sessions, where I would just, first of all, if I would say I was talking about history, then there would be this despair on the faces of all the children, and they would be like, this is, I hate the subject, why are you talking about it? And then if I asked them to name any women that they remember reading about in the Indian past, to make it more convenient, because they would immediately say Cleopatra, there's some kind of resonance with Cleopatra there. They would mention Rani Lakshmibai of Jhansi, they would mention Razia Sultana, and then they would grind to a halt. And then I would say, okay, so Razia's 13th century, was there any woman before this? And they would say, no, there's no woman before this. So then I would actually take them back to the, to the earliest written history, or written in the sense we haven't deciphered the script, but Harappan civilization, and I'd say, did women exist at that point of time? And instinctively the answer would be no. And then, of course, they would look sheepish a minute later and say, no, what did we just say? Obviously, women did exist. But that's a factor of the manner in which they are taught history in their textbooks. And this is actually not just true of India, but all over the world. The writing of history is male-centered. It is, as you said, Deepa, his story. It has nothing to do with her story. So some women make an entrance into the chronological sequence, because they can't be left out, then the sequence becomes a bit untidy and difficult to explain. But usually it's just these token women, and there's these enormous corpus of evidence belonging to a whole range of women that is just conveniently ignored. So as I mean, this gender bias is something that nobody really realizes that they're perpetuating, because it's just so, it's ubiquitous, it's insidious. And the children are, generation after generation of school children are just taught this, that men are the ones that mattered in the past, women did not matter. And in fact, that has a direct bearing on today's context, because if children are not taught to respect and acknowledge women in the past, they are not going to do so in the present. I thought that, okay, since I know about all these women and I've done so much research on them, then it's my responsibility actually to write about them for the young adult age group. I think it was that's say roughly 14 years and above, because this is the age when they actually start questioning the world around them, and they're capable of carrying a thought to its logical conclusion. So I thought, okay, let me write for this age group and let me tell them about these women who are actually legitimate constituents of their collective past that they have no idea about. So Prithvimahadevi is just one in a long line of such women who have been made invisible. And as you mentioned, Didda, Queen of Ice. So this is Queen of Ice, my earlier book, which is about Didda, who ruled Kashmir in the 10th century. And you will either find that she is mentioned in a very, very fleeting manner, as if, let's just rush through her rule and, we can just say that, dismiss her in a sentence. Or you will be told that she ruled, which means that she was not really a woman. A woman is not supposed to have ambition or be capable of holding her own on the throne. So let's see, does she have morals? Was she good? Did she go to the temples? Was she religious? These are standards that you would never apply when you're discussing a male ruler, in any context. So Prithvimahadevi, as you were told, is about a queen of Orissa in the 9th century, before Didda's time actually, who again has been almost virtually written out of the history of Orissa of those times. She will either be mentioned very fleetingly again, or you will be told that the downfall of the particular dynasty that she was a part of started with her rule. Because if the conventional idea is, if a woman sits on the throne, then that spells disaster. And I could just go on and on about the numerous powerful women that made such a huge mark in this period. But I think I'll get to that one book at a time when, I'm going to spend my life just, dedicated to this aspect. I have a strong feeling. So, which is why I wrote about her.
That was so wonderfully put, and to see you so passionate. I mean, you made it your mission, as if to say. And as we all know, children's writers know that whatever children read when they're, in their formative years, that makes such a strong impression in their minds. So Devika, would you like to read a short passage for, this is especially for the benefit of those who haven't read the book. So they get an entry into what this book is all about, what Prithvimahadevi is, who she is.
So there's a disclaimer right at the beginning. I usually don't like reading passages because I tend to read very fast. So I'm going to keep this very short. But this is a bit about Prithvimahadevi, reminiscing about her childhood and the manner in which her name comes to mean a lot to her and to define her personality. Of all my childhood memories, one comes to me time and again. I am no more than 8 or 9 years of age and in the palace garden at nightfall, skipping down one of the stone-lined paths. My father follows me, deep in conversation with his minister. I am annoyed that he is paying me no attention, so I look away from the path and call out to him. And this is how I come to stumble on a loose stone and crash heavily to the ground. My wails of pain and outrage bring him running to my side. He hauls me to my feet and wipes the dirt off my face. I'm sobbing so much that my breath comes in gasps, but my pride is injured more than my body. The minister is deeply distressed. He takes one look at my torn dress and the trickle of blood running down my face from a cut and turns to my father. Should I send for the physician? The princess is hurt. My father shakes his head, a frown creasing his brow. I know he's annoyed with me and the thought makes me sob even harder. Stop that crying at once, he orders. I do not obey right away, but because his attitude shocks me. I am expecting sympathy and concern, but receive neither. He glares at me till my sobs eventually die down, and then he lays a gentle hand across my still heaving shoulders. Have you forgotten your name, he asks. Think about its meaning. You must never lose sight of it. I do as I am bid, and I'm instantly ashamed of myself. Tears do not become me. I am named for something else. This memory has come to my rescue more times than I can remember. When tears threaten and my spirit quails, my name reminds me of who I really am. I am Prithvimahadevi, the goddess of the earth. What could be stronger than this element that surrounds us, signifying power, solidity, and endurance? My name has come to mark my nature over the years. I possess courage and forbearance in abundance. Someday they will stand me in good stead.
Thanks so much for that lovely passage. I love the fact that she says, I'm Prithvi Mahadevi. And that is what, kind of that sentiment supports her, gives her confidence through all the obstacles that she's going to face, the difficult situations that she faces after she gets married. Okay, now there's one question that always comes up when we're writing historical fiction. Sometimes you feel that through works of historical fiction, fiction sometimes becomes history. And yesterday, in that very interesting discussion on non-fiction, you had mentioned about the blurring of lines between fiction and non-fiction. So now when you were writing, you said, you built up Prithvi Mahadevi's story from just 2 inscriptions. That's a wonderful feat of the imagination because, from those 2 inscriptions, you have created not only such a powerful character, but also assembled a whole cast of characters around her. So, what did you keep in mind, while you were fleshing out her personality? Because, see, she is confident, she knows, she's aware of her qualities, she knows, especially, that kind of rivalry with her brother Yayati. She knows that she will do much better than Yayati. She says, that I resemble my father in many ways. I have his qualities. So, but she's conscious of the gender bias all along. So, what did you keep in mind? How did you build up this character so that she becomes real and alive for your readers who become so fascinated by her?
So it was a challenge because, as you mentioned, there are only 2 inscriptions that are the main source for Prithvi Mahadevi's reign. The little that we know about her is that she belonged to the Somavashi family, which ruled over a part of medieval Orissa. And at some point, her father puts her on the throne of a rival dynasty, the Bhaumakaras, where she holds her own for a while. And then she sort of disappears into the annals of history. So nobody really knows what happens to her eventually. But the Somavamshis eventually take over the Bhaumakara. So a family eventually takes over the rival kingdom. So with these few pieces of information, I had to do a lot of intelligent guesswork because I couldn't give full rein to my imagination. Otherwise, it would become a work of fantasy rather than history. So I knew that if she was capable of sitting on the throne, or her father deemed her capable of sitting on the throne, that means that she had some basic, intelligence, resourcefulness, maybe ambition, which is why he chose her rather than her brother to put her on this, and that to a rival throne where she had to win over the loyalty of a hostile set of subjects. That is obviously not an easy task under any circumstances. The fact that she also issues in her inscriptions a line where she says, I am the successor to the person who was before me on the throne. He had no children. Now that in fact was incorrect because her predecessor on the Bhaumakara throne had 2 sons who could have easily succeeded him, but she sets their claims aside and says, I am now ruling because there is nobody there. So this obviously indicates some shrewdness, political sagacity, an ability to think fast on your feet so that, if I issue this proclamation and if I say it often enough, it's going to become a truth. The people are going to accept it. So again, where did she learn all these things from? So obviously she was privy to political discussions as part of her growing up years, because this kind of awareness just suddenly doesn't descend on you. So with that, I created this whole atmosphere where she grows up becoming more interested in her father's world of politics. And I also figured out that there must have been some rivalry between her and her brother, because her brother couldn't have been very happy with her selection as ruler of the Bhaumakara throne, while he just sits around, as waiting to take over the Somavashi throne at some point in the future. I also, whenever I write historical fiction, I try not to invent too many characters, because I don't want to give an irresponsible impression of the past to my readers. So all the characters that I usually deal with are usually all real. So here too, they are real. So there are mentions of all of them. There's evidence for all of them. And so with this small cast of people, I set about trying to reconstruct her life, and keeping to the facts as far as is known. So, I hope that I have succeeded in being accurate as well as making it readable. And thank you for your kind words about the book.
I was really impressed by the way she handled situations, and the rivalry with her brother is, it creates so much interesting tension in the story, and very important, to the development of the story. And then again, that ambivalence, she has as a woman. She's very affectionate, even motherly towards her sister-in-law's sons. And I like the way, I don't want to give away too much, because there are so many interesting developments in the story, but the way she thinks on her feet. But that's really fascinating what you've told us about how she recorded all this in her inscriptions, and that gave you such deep insights into her character. Now, another thing which I found really fascinating in the book was that you brought out the contrast between the Hindu and Buddhist ways of life. And, that is something we don't come across too often. Like, for example, she is born into a Hindu family and she's married into a Buddhist family. So that is another fact that is generally not so well known about, the ways of living. And she, she even says that she remarks that women are deeply important to this court, because there is a tradition of a woman ruling there. So can you elaborate a little bit on this for our audience?
Yeah, so as you said, Prithvimahadevi finds herself in a situation where she not only has to marry into a rival court, but the religion that is followed there is also different from hers. So she has to do a lot of adjusting on different levels. Well, as far as writings on Buddhism go, it is generally believed that women under Buddhism had slightly more freedom, and their lives were less circumscribed than women under Hinduism. Now, of course, that is a very hotly debated topic, because all religions are inherently misogynistic. So, the extent of freedom that you could have had if you're a Buddhist woman was not that large compared to, it's a relative comparison. But women do seem to donate more in the Buddhist cause all through ancient medieval India. So maybe they had more access to resources and visibility. So that's, I think, a debate, which is a separate debate altogether. But also, one of the reasons why the women in general were important to the Bhaumakara court, apart from the fact that they were Buddhists, is the fact that they had a deeply tribal context, to their rule, their origin. Their origins were rooted in tribal mores, like Kashmir of Didda's time, which again has a very deeply tribal context. And it's a known fact that, in a tribal context, women have more visibility, the gender roles are relatively unstructured, so they have a voice. And so therefore, that's probably the reason why both in Kashmir and in Orissa, in these times, women could exert their presence, they had a palpable influence, they could leave a mark on the landscape, because of course, it was a patriarchal setup. Nobody is disputing that fact, but maybe it was capable of being transgressed slightly more than in other extremely circumscribed contexts.
Okay, thanks so much for this, because you've opened up so many interesting ideas, and you've given us a peep into a history that is really, not commonly known. All these facts about the way society was, and the ways of, well, even a bit, you've even given us a glimpse of the lives of the common people and how the whole system worked. Now, I there was another thing that occurred to me, that why is it we are so ignorant of ancient and early medieval history? We read a lot about Mughal history. It seems to me that most of the historical fiction that comes out and the best-selling books, whether fiction or non-fiction, are about the Mughal period. But it's very unfortunate that we are so disconnected with our ancient history, which actually forms the basis for culture, the development of culture. And culture is so well established in ancient times. And that's, I think, the most, a very valuable thing to remember, that, that our culture has such deep roots. So why do you think ancient India is so little written about?
Um, there's a practical reason and there's a sort of intangible reason. The practical reason is that the further back in time you go, the fewer your sources are. Therefore, it becomes more difficult to reconstruct history in an accurate manner. So, for again, for Didda's rule in Queen of Ice, there were just, again, a couple of inscriptions, a couple of coins, and a text. And again, as Prithvimahadevi's, in her case, I told you, there were just a couple of inscriptions. So, whereas when you get into the Mughal times, it's heavily documented. You have so many sources of evidence, spanning a range of just your buildings, your archival material, and everything. So it becomes easy to actually access those materials and then set about writing a story. So that's the practical reason, which is why I think more people want to focus on the Mughals or the colonial period, because that's you don't really have to do research in this terribly, it's like drawing blood out of stone, trying to find out, some piece of evidence in the ancient period or the early medieval period. The other reason, which is not the practical one, but the more insidious one, is nobody really cares. I mean, there's a handful of people who say, oh, I wonder if there is some woman before this. And then there is this usual conflation of legend and myth with history, saying, oh, yes, of course, I know women in the past. I know Sita and, of the Ramayana. And, I know, so there were women. But then, you have to remember that there is history, and then there are other kinds of oral or written history, which are not necessarily the mainstream history. And so I think that there isn't that much interest. And also, it requires a lot of dedication to be sitting and trying to uncover these stories, because it's not easy to, you can't just write something saying, oh, actually there's this person, but I'm not really sure what happened to, to her. And, and then there's this other person, and again, we don't have evidence. So who's going to read that, and who's going to want to pursue, that line of inquiry? So I think it's fallen to the lot of historians largely, because they are trained to deal with sources. But within history, the subject discipline, I think I saw a question here which just popped up on the screen saying the reason why we don't learn so much about women history is that there are very few women historians. That's not true, actually. There are a whole range of women historians who have also internalized this gender bias to such an extent that they just continue with the same gender blind narrative of the past. So it's very few of them who actually challenge the the received wisdom and say, hey, is there something wrong here because we're not learning something? So I think this is something that has to be tackled in so many levels. And also the Mughal women are themselves so intriguing and powerful, and some of them also very enigmatic personalities, that I think the human interest generally is drawn to them as very interesting characters that one can read about. So I think that's why it's a lopsided kind of treatment.
Yeah, thanks for sharing all this, because this is something that has always, intrigued me. That okay, the myths, the myths are there, the epics are there, very, gripping our imagination. but not so much of ancient India, other than, say Ashoka and Chandragupta Maurya. Now, it's interesting you brought up the fact that women historians too have a gender bias. That's, you have to really think about this conditioning that no, the women could not wield power, or even, it seems like a big question mark to them. Now, what I'd like to ask you about now is that research is such an important part of writing historical fiction. Research is, I would say, as important as imagination. So, first of all, what do you think about this? And secondly, you are an academic, you're a scholar, and you've done some very advanced research. And would you like to share some of your methods for if there are some aspiring writers of historical fiction watching? Would you like to share your methods, please?
Yeah, sure. My problem is actually a reverse issue. Like normally when you sit down to write historical fiction, then you have to sit and do research. My problem is that I have done so much of research, and to condense all that into something that a young adult would want to read is quite a challenge, because the temptation is to put in all the facts that I've learned simply because I've spent so many years just knowing that. But then it would just clutter the narrative with too many facts, and the readers are going to run away saying, oh my God, this is no different from our history textbook, so we don't want to read it. So, I have to strike this judicious balance between having the main facts there, but not strangling the narrative with too many of them. But when somebody is actually sitting down to write historical fiction, I'm not saying it has to be the prerogative of a historian to write. Anybody can write historical fiction, provided your research is in place. So if you want to write about a particular period or a particular person in history, you have to first figure out the sources, the original sources that pertain to the person or the period, and have your research done completely before you start off, writing, and not just suddenly stopping in the middle and saying, oh my God, so what did they actually eat? And can I actually have this here? So there are so many inaccuracies that can creep into a story of based in history, because, it's just, if people don't do adequate research. So I think that if it's to make it easier for yourself, if you're starting this for the first time, then maybe you should stick to periods that are well documented. But then you could also weave a wonderful story around the old Stone Age or the new Stone Age, where you just basically have stones as your evidence. So anything is possible if you just have the right blend of imagination and facts with you.
So yeah, that's the wonderful part of being a writer. Anything is possible in the world of imagination. But yeah, if you're writing historical fiction, you have to really, make your timeline and fill in all the events, and then work around that, and the food and the garments and the ways of living. So yeah, it is a real challenge, I must say. You've been able to tie it up wonderfully with your research as a historian and as a children's writer. Okay, now another thing I'd like to ask you is, this is a bit of on a lighter note. Since Queen of Ice is already going to be made into a movie, if Queen of Earth was to be made into a movie, is there any actress whom you think would suit the role?
For some reason, I can only see the same actress in both roles, the Queen of Ice and Prithvimahadevi of Queen of Earth, because I'm very partial to Kajol. I think she has a very strong personality that comes out in the way she emotes, and she is a brilliant actress. So I think she would do justice to both characters, but obviously one cannot have a monotonous repetition. So maybe a Kajol in one role, and maybe Alia Bhatt in I don't know. I wonder what the audience thinks. I mean, I guess you have your own views. For me, any male character becomes Hrithik Roshan automatically, and any female becomes Kajol. So,
Deepika, I think Sukirti.
Deepika. You're
That
one. Yeah.
passed through my mind too. Yeah. So yeah, we'd love to see Vidya Balan. Why? Oh
Vidya
yeah,
Balan is also good choice.
great choice. Okay, Devika, before we open up for the audience questions, there's another thing I wanted to ask you. What are your future plans? This is a series, I understand. So who are the other queens waiting in the wings so that the audience can look forward to those wonderful unknown stories that we're just eagerly waiting to discover?
So I could actually, because we're shortage of time, I guess, talk about two interesting women of Kashmir, whom I will be writing about. One was a queen who ruled before. The name was Sugandha, and she managed to again do very remarkable things like concealing the fact. She accompanies her husband on a military expedition where he dies, and she conceals the fact of his death for political reasons. So kind of props his body up to show to the people that he's still alive, but actually he's dead. And then she takes over the throne, and she manages to not just keep the throne for a while, but when she's at one point ousted, she manages to make a comeback bid, and so very interesting, resourceful, strong woman. There's another very remarkable queen from, again, early medieval Kashmir called Suryamati, who actually is married to this completely sort of useless man who pawns the throne of Kashmir because he needs money. So she manages to get back the throne of Kashmir, and restore its prestige. And then she tells him, you just you sit and I will administer the kingdom, at which she manages to do very well. And so there are a lot of conflicts between husband and wife because she has decided that he's useless, so she's taking over from him. So there are lots of wonderful stories like these that come up. And in fact, even non-royal women in early medieval Bengal, for instance, they form such a vibrant body of donors and builders, building all over the landscape, naming the buildings after themselves or the sculptures after themselves, patronizing certain building workshops. These are things you never really know about, So there's so much material to write about. Yeah.
So women found their ways to push back against the gender bias. Just digressing a little bit, is Suryamati the same queen for whom Somadev wrote the Katha Sarasa?
Katha Sarit Sagar, exactly. Yeah, he actually wrote it apparently as a diversion for the royal couple because they were depressed. I mean, they were kind of bound to be depressed if they had these kind of strained relations between them. So he wrote this set of stories to sort of distract them, and he praises Suryamati very highly in his in the foreword to his book, saying that she organizes all the distribution of grain, she oversees the warehouses, she oversees the administration. So yeah, he's another good source of evidence. Yeah.
Absolutely fascinating. And now we are just going to discover all these ladies. Okay, Devika, could you read another passage to, because I'm sure everybody's curiosity is being heightened. So it would be nice if you could.
Okay, just another short one where
Okay.
she's actually talking to her aunt, and wondering about her life and so on. And she's realized that she's slightly unconventional because she's interested in politics and the world of power and policy. And she's not supposed to be learning all those things because education for women was something completely different. Um, I labor over my writing skills as also those of reading. And it is not an uncommon sight for my aunt to enter my chambers and find me hunched over a manuscript, my quill at hand. This never got me anywhere, she says curtly. You won't need any of it when you are married. And what if my husband can't read? I ask. Wouldn't he be grateful to me if I helped him with his records? She clicks her tongue. Your head is full of grandiose notions. Your husband will have officers around him to follow his orders. Your role will be different. There is nothing much that a wife needs to do other than bear children. Her tone is bitter. Once she was young and full of dreams. She married the best among her suitors, an allied ruler of the Somavamshis who showed great promise and was destined to rise high. And then a few years after the wedding, he died suddenly and inconveniently in his sleep, leaving my aunt without a home or a future. I asked her, do you remember what it was like to be a queen? Her eyes filled with memories. For a time, I thought I was the most fortunate girl in the world. I felt fulfilled, grand, like a goddess even. But then her mouth twists as if she has tasted a sour lemon. We can plan and look forward to so many things, she says, but life can sometimes take you on an unwanted journey, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. You should learn this much from my story. It is a poor lesson, I reflect. Why should I let life do with me what it will? No, I will fashion it to my desires. My life won't be like yours, I blurt out before I can stop myself. You have the arrogance of youth, she says. Age will teach you to sing a different tune. I refuse to share her views. From what I can see, you need courage to withstand life's designs, to follow your dreams, and that is what I will use. I have been happy thus far in the confines of my loving home, but I yearn for other things, new experiences, a life beyond the one dictated for me. When I think of the future, it is with anticipation, and I will not allow the anxieties of my elders to taint my vision.
Thank you so much, Devika.
Awful.
I really like the way you built up these relationships, but I could go on and on discussing this fascinating book, but we would like to now answer the questions from the readers. So, dear viewers, please do pick up this book, those of you who haven't got it as yet, and it's not only a fascinating read, but also you will discover so much about our shared past. So can we have the questions, please? Sukirti, will you?
Sure. I see one from Vasundhara. She's asking us to throw light on why rural women are empowered in spite of the patriarchal setup. So, do we see a difference between rural women and middle class women in terms of being more empowered?
Again, every statement that you make about women has a particular context. You can't generalize. So if I say rural women in a particular area are empowered, it will not hold true for some other place. So you have to look at the time period, the area, and the amount of freedom that you think those women have vis-a-vis the women in the city. Now, rural households were usually modeled on the royal household. So the extent of freedom is not really going to be too divergent from what the royal women, have access to. Having said that, maybe if you contrast the lives of non-royal women with those of royal women, yes, there is maybe a slight difference that could be had in certain periods, simply because within the confines of the palace, women were subject to scrutiny, supervision, control. But whereas in say somewhere, if you're living in the countryside somewhere or some rural hamlet, then maybe you don't have to model your behavior too much on the royal household. You can give a certain extent of freedom. But having said that, it's a very relative comparison and a very contextual one too. So you have to say which period you are talking about, where. Again, if I'm saying North India, there are different kinds of evidence that I find for different types of places in North India in different time periods. So again, you can't generalize.
So, one of the questions that I had when I was reading it, especially when you go through and you read about this queen, you definitely see she is more skilled, but she is often very torn because she is torn about her role and her role in society. What was your thinking when you came up with that, especially in the beginning when she thinks she would be a better leader? And then once she is becoming a leader, her maternal instincts start to kick in.
Well, yeah, I mean, but in doing that, I'm not actually adhering to stereotypes saying, women's maternal instincts is actually what comes to the fore. I'm just talking about her as an individual who has a very strong relationship with a couple of people in her husband's court. I'm not going to give this away because
Yeah,
it'll
I
be a
don't.
spoiler.
That's why I had to phrase my question also, so I don't give away the story.
Is she as an individual, because she's constantly introspecting, she's constantly asking herself questions about herself, about her limits, about the boundaries. Is she comfortable with violence? Is she comfortable with certain things that her father is comfortable with? Is she the same as her father? And so ultimately, when it comes to a decision that she has to take, a life-changing decision that she has to take about her life, it is basically her conscience that comes to the fore and, dictates to her which is the right path, to take, rather than what she should have done for political reasons. So it's just one woman's story. So she did that. Whereas if you're talking about this woman, the Queen of Ice, she didn't really allow her conscience to trouble her too much. So again, these are two different. So none of them is a stereotype. Women, anybody can be anything. So, and all personalities are different. So this is a person who doesn't allow anything to stand in the way of her power and her ambition. This is a woman who keeps stopping every 2 steps and saying, is this okay for me? Is this not okay for me? And that influences the decisions that both eventually take about their lives at the end.
So Siggy is asking a question, and this is very interesting, that why are queens and princesses glorified as icons of beauty and love and not for their brains?
The same reason why we expect women to be beautiful and fair, and that's it, and not have a voice, even in today's world. That's what's so alarming about this gender bias. If you're looking at, for example, let me just take Cleopatra's name because everybody likes to talk about her. If you read the biographies of Cleopatra, actual, really incisive biographies, you'll actually find that she was not beautiful. Apparently, the evidence indicates that she was not beautiful. Whereas she has been glorified as the most beautiful woman, who sort of just captured the attention of all these Roman emperors. And actually, she was just very intelligent and she was witty. Now, that is something that has not really got into the collective consciousness. All you think about is, oh, Cleopatra was beautiful. Therefore, you need somebody, beautiful actors to act for, because that was all she was known for. No, she was known for her brains. That is what captivated those Roman emperors. And similarly, let's just take the example of this woman, Didda, was beautiful, but she was lame. She had a deformed foot. So she's actually a cripple. So you're not going to hold her up as as the model of a beautiful, perfect woman because she had a deformity. So it's very unfortunate that women have to be always lauded for the outward appearance and not for their thinking abilities and so on. But that is a debate that we could just sit and trash out for hours on end. So.
Sorry, ma'am. Sorry to interrupt. Sorry, ma'am. I'm interrupting.
Go ahead, please.
Devika ma'am, so that it just means that they're trying to overshadow their brains with the talk about their beauty, so that the people don't really know about the real person. It's just the superficial facade that they have there.
Yeah, but look around you today. If there's a very prominent woman in power, so some very prominent woman figure, not just in power, but somewhere, talk will not necessarily be always about how she got to that point, but the talk might just immediately move to some scandal or something she's involved in, something slightly unsavory, because as I told you, there are very different ways in which the women and men are evaluated all through the past. For women, it is character, religiosity, piety. Did they have a good nature? Did they adhere to a stereotype? For men, it is never that. You will never have a discussion on. Let's take the example of Lalita Aditya of Kashmir, who was a very, very kind of bloodthirsty king, actually, and but was very famous for having extended Kashmir's boundaries in the early medieval period. You'll always hear about his battles and his, the violence that he unleashed, but you will never ever hear this question about, okay, did he visit temples? Was he actually a good man? Was he listening to his conscience? Did he have morals? But the minute you come to Diddas, that is the first question you will be asked. You will not be asked, how did she manage to rule Kashmir for 50 years, 50, ensuring peace and prosperity? How did she manage to do that? No, it will be, did she have affairs? Was she actually, and she has, been called notorious and dissolute and so on. These are adjectives that you never use for a male. And it's come down to today. If you just look around you and read narratives around you, it's perpetuated all right through the ages. So yeah.
So in a way, history has filtered into our present. That's how it's shaped the
absolutely society. What happened in the past will definitely shape what our present is, which is why I say, if you do not have that awareness that women were very relevant parts of our historical past at all times, then you're going to think of them as insignificant even in the present, and that will carry on into the future. So it has a direct bearing on how women are treated in today's context and in the future context as well. That's why it's so important to attack this gender bias right where it starts.
So Devika, I think this leads into the question that even Shruti is asking: how can we more actively change narratives like this?
Well, it's not easy. It's not as if there's, I'm reading about a particular period in history and I say, 1 minute, I don't read about the women here. What's going on? And there's no quick fix solution that suddenly you'll get information about that and fill in the gap. No, because information is not always available. I told you sources are very problematic. There's a lot of research that goes into it. But the very fact that you're problematizing it, the very fact that you're posing a question saying that maybe I am not getting the full picture here, maybe there is something here about women that I'm not being told about, is itself a start. So I'm not saying that everybody has to be a historian and rush out and immediately get access to sources, but if you started that process of thinking, and if you're telling yourself that, no, this is too male-centric, this kind of narrative, what is there that I'm missing out on? And this is there of any field. It's not just history. It can be, there is gender bias in literature, in sports, in music, in dance, every field. So as long as you're aware of it, and you don't internalize it and perpetuate it, then at least that's a start.
Thank you. Thank you. I think Purva is also asking a very similar question, that this image that has been created and this image is being passed down from history to us, where they're literally wiping out also even periods. I know that historians like you are working very hard to bring some of it back. What more can be done to change this image?
Well, be aware of the fact that, there are different narratives, several narratives. It's not always one voice that you need to read. If you're interested in a particular period, read a lot that has been written on it so that you'll get different perspectives, number one. Number two, history is not the domain of the world at large, which unfortunately it has come to be. I always say we won't dare to say anything about chemistry or physics simply because we are not trained in that subject. But history belongs apparently to the world. So I have come across such ridiculous generalizations on history made by people to me saying, oh, actually this happened, you don't know it. And that actually happened simply because everybody feels equipped to talk about history, whether or not they have a background in the subject. So we get to where we are with a lot of rigorous training. So I think you need to respect where the lines of history are drawn and where it starts to dangerously turn into something that you are fashioning for your purposes. So yeah.
Thank you. So with that, any closing thoughts, Deepa, and then closing thoughts from Devika before, amazing, amazing amount of information that you have shared today. But any last closing thoughts both of you have?
Okay. What I'd like to say is that, we can take away a lot from discussions like these. And especially, I'm not talking really about role models as such, because I know people look back on historical figures and somewhere, we feel, okay, she could accomplish this. Why not me? That sort of thing. So I really feel that we really need to bring all these discussions, more into the open and speak very frankly about what we feel, what our responses are. Because I know when Devika mentioned about how so many women historians are gender biased themselves, that's very alarming. That women themselves are, so conditioned that they'll suppress their something which is in their interest, but they don't look on it like that. That bringing these facts out into the open or questioning, that is the main thing. I think every historian, every scholar needs to question whatever they come across and dig a little deeper. That's what Devika has been doing. So thanks a lot, Sukirti and Devika. I really enjoyed the discussion and brought so many ideas into my head, and I'm sure, into the minds of all the people watching. So congratulations once again.
Thank you so much, Deepa. And thank you, Sukirti. And as you've said, these discussions are a kind of a way forward. You at least when you sit down and you think about it, and then you go away and you think about it some more, and then maybe you communicate it to a few other people, and maybe you read books that take you along that path. So then, it's a start. As I said, there's no quick fix solution for this. We're all aware of the bias that goes around, and you're aware of the bias in history, at least most of you are. But just that, tomorrow when your child is reading a textbook, for example, that talks a lot about the men and then has a photograph of women's ornaments in the past and says, that's the only thing that we need to know about women, what they wore. their jewelry rather than what they actually did. And that's a starting point for a discussion right there, saying, okay, maybe your textbook is not telling you this, but this is not the complete picture either. So you can then take that as a journey to go and explore, and historical fiction is a wonderful way to actually, get to know about worlds that you're not currently acquainted with, and just to broaden your horizon. And I've loved being a part of this discussion and answering your questions. And thank you so much for this. Thank you, Deepa. Thank you, Suki.
Thank you, Devika, for joining us. Definitely a very enlightening discussion. I think we're hearing that from many of our viewers also. I think my big takeaway is question. And if you see a narrative that maybe just becomes very unbalanced, do look at what other narratives could be there. With that, I wish you all a very exciting Saturday. And thank you, Deepa and Devika, for joining us here on Sipping Thoughts.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.